For Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerd Dave, and today I'm joined by Monty Martin and Kelly McLaughlin from Dungeon Dudes. How are you guys doing today?
Oh,
Doing
excellent.
so good.
It's good to have you guys on. I mean, I feel like this deja vu. We did this like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, when we were just a little wee young channel, I remember very vividly. I think we'd only been making videos on YouTube for maybe 4 or 5 months, and we had a chat with you at Nerdarchy, and we are like, "Wow, Nerdarchy is having us on the chat. This is so cool!" And we were just so like awestruck by it. It was a lot of fun, and I think we briefly crossed paths, maybe like for 5 seconds at PAX Unplugged back in December, and then just had been in touch here and there. So it's almost like a long-awaited party, I think, for us.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we were sitting at about 3,000 subscribers when we last talked to you, and I remember how exciting it was. Oh, it was 300.
It was like the first January of our channel. Yeah, it was really early.
I remember finding you guys, and even when you first started out, it was really good. The content was really good. You guys had decent production values. Like, everything is so good. Like, I often say now, if Nerdarchy was to start, would have started today, the way we did, we would have never made it. No one would have no idea who we are. We were just lucky that we were in early, and what we were doing was a little bit different. But like, even like in the beginning, we've always liked to like bring up other creators and other people in the community, and and share the space as much as possible, because we do feel like everyone comes up together, and we love the hobby, and we see other people that are passionate about it. Obviously we want to stop and chat with them for sure.
Yeah.
And
it's actually overwhelming how many people are in the community and how many people are making amazing things now and contributing to this conversation in a really big and really meaningful way. Like, there's so many different creators across different platforms contributing to the conversation, whether it's people making live stream games, or videos on YouTube helping other people get into the hobby, or people creating things on the Dungeon Masters Guild. I just got a 3D printer, and I've been following that community of all the people creating miniatures and terrain and accessories. Like, there's so many different nested communities within this hobby, and people can really actually make a mark on it in an amazing way now.
One of the things that has blown me away is right now, I want to say, like, if you don't count Critical Role and the Matt Colvilles of the world, like the Apex channel right now is a crafting channel for RPGs and D&D stuff. Like, it's a niche within a niche, which is crazy.
Yeah,
because Jeremy Pillipal at Black Magic Craft is killing it out there with some amazing content. Another Canadian
as well. Yeah. There you go. You got to watch out for us. We know what we're doing up here.
I think what's really amazing though is, like, even within all the categories that D&D offers, like there's so many ways to make a mark and to do something a little bit different than everybody else is doing. Like, even when Monty and I whenever we're discussing like what videos we're going to shoot, sometimes I'll bring up a suggestion and it's like, well, no, so and so covers that really, really well. Is there something that we can talk about that isn't covered as much? And like, even within that, I think there's so many channels that offer different views and different looks at different aspects of the game. Mm-hmm. And so it is a really beautiful community with so many places to go to look for resources and things to inspire you.
Yeah, and that's where I think for Kelly and I now, like, we try to find ways to point to other people who are doing awesome things in the space that might be specialized. So like, we had this opportunity to try out a 3D printer, but there's awesome people already in the 3D printer community that we can point people to and be like, yeah, like, we had this experience as beginners, but look at all this amazing stuff of these experts that are out there that have smaller channels in many cases, but are doing amazing things. And so I think something that, especially in the recent with the recent events in the world, it's something that Kelly and I think about, of like, what are ways that we can invite more people and shine spotlights on other people that are contributing in really special and meaningful ways. and use kind of our presence in the community to say, yeah, we're not experts on this, but here's some people that are doing awesome stuff that are.
So, do you guys have a favorite kind of content to create? Because I know Kelly had mentioned, well, we see people doing other things, so we kind of stay away from it. I'm the opposite. Like when people ask me, I'm like, don't worry about if other people are doing it. They, the community hasn't heard your take on it yet.
What's our favorite? I mean, I go ahead. Monty.
I have to say that the one thing that I do think is oversaturated right now on YouTube is people giving DMing advice. So we're really, really careful when we actually think about like talking about how to DM. And for a lot of for us, we found that how to be a good D&D player was a big thing that a lot of our most popular videos have always been about. Like I think that one of the big things that we had early on in our channel was we did all of our class guides and our principles for players and helping players figure out, how to be a good D&D player. And that was a really special part of the early part of our channel. And I think that we continue to look at like, how do you, there's so much about how to be a good game master, but there's not as much about how to be a good player. And in many ways, I think that the focus of content on being a good dungeon master really creates this idea that like the dungeon master themselves is a service provider and that everything is at the fun of the dungeon master does everything for the players. But in reality, I think in our experiences especially, the players are so much of a contributor to the overall environment of a great D&D game. And players realizing actually just how much power a player has to make a D&D game awesome is something that I think a lot of players don't realize, that you are just as responsible as the dungeon master for how good your D&D game is.
For myself, it's actually funny because I do agree with Monty that like our player focused videos have been kind of all stars. But for myself, I'll admit right away that when it comes to Monty and myself, Monty is the DM. He is like the master DM in our group. And I am the second in command when it comes to DMing. When it comes to being a player, that's like my favorite part to jump into. But what has actually happened is when we do the videos for DMs, we always try to include like what could inspire you to create a campaign or like little nods like that. And my favorite moments when we're actually creating content are when we're doing DM focused videos and Monty will come to me and say, I have a video about this random thing that not many people pay attention to. Like you've been working on one for a while for like how to improve overland travel in your D&D games. And I'm waiting for that because I've been sitting here writing notes on how to do overland travel better in my upcoming campaign. And I'm just like, oh, I can't wait to do this video with Monty. He's going to say some stuff and we're going to have to like, I'm going to have to cut out chunks of me going, wait, what? And there's always those moments. You can actually catch them in a few of our videos where Monty says, what if you use this way? And I just turn and look at him and like you see a light bulb appear above my head. Like I have never considered that. And it's those moments that I think in the couple years or a little bit longer that we've been doing Dungeon Dudes, I try to hide the fact that I don't know a bunch of stuff. And then Monty will say something and I try to keep it contained. And I'm just sitting there being like, this is brilliant. I need to write this down. And so I'm gaining a lot out of this as well. And I think that I've become a better dungeon master just by researching and filming our episodes has actually allowed me to grow so much. And so I've really appreciated and really enjoy working on the DM focused videos because they inspire me to create my own worlds and do my own things.
Well, they say to teach is to learn something twice, and through us exploring this thing that's called Nerdarchy, we've definitely developed a lot by listening to a lot of other voices and meeting a lot of other people. Because prior to Nerdarchy, our group was like this self-contained bubble. We didn't game at game stores. We didn't go to conventions for gaming. Like we had our group. We were very fortunate in the sense that like we always had a core of like 3-4 people that were rolling the game, and we could always pull in some extras, to fill out a table, where some people would go and other people would come over the years. So, we've been fortunate that way. So but it's also made us complacent and lazy. Like we didn't have to go and we didn't have to look for new players and new DMs. So, but the downside to that is you don't get other perspectives and other points of view, and we're also a little older. So like our gaming experience when it started, there was no internet, so it wasn't really a thought to us to go online for this stuff. You know, until we started putting our stuff out there and going, oh, you know what? There is people doing this. When we first started, not as many, and you know now there is so many great creators out there and doing it in different ways too, right? Like we were one of the first to be like multiple personalities, but now you've got that, you got talking heads, you've got animators out there, and you've got these people that are doing it like somewhere's they're not animators, but they do a lot of like graphics and images and talk over that. So you know, there's just so many cool things going on. I also noticed like the past, I guess, not this year clearly, but last year you guys started getting out a lot more and hitting the con scene.
Yeah, we were, that was a lot of fun. We went to Origins, we went to PAX Unplugged, and we had other plans this year, which we don't now.
Yeah, it was
None of us do. Yeah,
it was unfortunate because I think Monty and I, at the end of 2019, were sitting there being like, all right, 2020 is the year that we hit up so many conventions, and you know, that will have to be another year now probably, but it's so fun.
Yeah, that said, one of the things that I have done myself recently, and we've tried to find opportunities for Kelly to do this as well, is I've always been intermittently I've been a participant in the Adventurers League and organized play in Toronto, and so for a while I would run Adventurers League modules out of one of our local game shops, and that kind of, as the channel started to grow, like I did that a little bit less and less, and because I just had less time. But recently, a few of the Adventurers League groups here in Toronto have moved into online formats and have been running Adventurers League epics online through Discord and Roll20. And I volunteered to DM some of those, and that's been a lot of fun because those have all been done for charity. So the proceeds of those have gone to Sick Kids here in Toronto, the Sick Kids Hospital, and it was a lot of fun because people, the rule was for $1 you could buy a reroll, and so thousands of rerolls have been bought in the name of these Adventures League modules, and it's also recently given me an opportunity to play with some cool people and get some new perspectives, because I think there's a lot of diversity in the play styles that happen in organized play. Like sometimes you get the very min-maxy, like power gamer, like I just want to kick butt in combat and crunch all the numbers, and then you genuinely do get people that want to role play a cool, quirky character that also has a great concept in Adventures League. So I do enjoy doing that for getting to meet new people and encounter new play styles, and also run different types of modules that I wouldn't normally run. Some Adventures League modules are absolutely amazing and incredible, and some of the most creative game design is happening in those spaces. There's a few that leave a lot to be desired. I think that some of the modules struggle with the one-shot format of Adventures League and would be amazing if they could be run over multiple sessions, but kind of the time constraint that you have in Adventures League, which is really real, is a thing. And definitely from streaming games, our game sessions of our live streams are 3 hours long, and that's actually taught me a lot as a DM about the importance of pacing. And so I find that there's a lot of modules that I'll read now where it's like, this module does not have a good sense of what its pacing is and how it's going to move from one scene to the next. It's really, the streaming thing has really taught me a lot about how to be a better dungeon master, actually.
Yeah, I agree, because we've learned a lot from running games online as far as like how much time does it really take to do a thing. And honestly, it works out to be about, I found it works out to be about an encounter an hour. Whether it's exploration, social, or combat, any combination, it doesn't really seem to matter. Basically, the players can blow that out, to an hour or 2 hours easily. And occasionally, though, you get it where it goes the other way, and your players just like race through all the content. So it's like it's a fine balancing act. Like one of the very first adventures I ran at a convention was like that. It's like I had one group that like I had let them know that it was a time thing, and they took that to like the ninth degree and just ran with it. I'm like, wow, you guys just went through all my material in about half the time. So yeah, but you know, it was a learning experience for the next time I run that at a convention. Um, I will say too, and I don't know, you can answer me whether you guys feel the same or not. Is when you have these opportunities to play with more people and different play styles, how does that affect the content you guys are creating?
I I think something that's happened for me is like I run a home game and I've invited several different friends into that game. A lot of newcomers or a lot of people who are returning to the game after several years, and we try to mix it up every once in a while. And so I've gotten to experience a lot of different play styles, and I find that it actually has helped us highlight things that maybe weren't apparent before, like things when we're talking in our videos about how to be a good player or what to look out for when you're a new player taking on a rogue, or like, you know, a certain other class. Like I remember one of the players at my table taking on the rogue, and there were a lot of points in the way that he was playing it that we had to be like, oh, you might want to, you know, adjust how much of a uh, lone wolf you're being here, or like things like that. And it kind of started to highlight things that I wanted to talk to my players about, which allowed me to bring that into the videos. So by experiencing all these different play styles, you get to experience different people's takes on what works really well and what doesn't. I'll even say, for example, Monty and I both thought Shield Master was an awful feat and nobody should ever take it, until Pluto Jackson, Joe, who plays in our live stream, was like, I'm going to build a character around Shield Master. And through the whole campaign, he used it amazingly.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, when we made our Shield Master video, it was really because we got to play with Joe, and Joe taught us how good Shield Master could be and what the benefits of it were. And so by experiencing so many different playstyles, you get to experience so many different uses of spells, feats, abilities, role playing that you may not have gotten to experience in your standalone group that you've played with for years.
The juicy thing for me is in doing these charity games, they have been Adventures League epics, which have high level content. So I've been able to run a couple characters, a couple games that have been filled with 20th level characters. Which is really fun and really challenging in its own respect. And some of the modules that I've run with it had one of the interesting things that I learned about that was that a lot of high level Dungeons and Dragons modules in their combat encounters try to invent additional mechanics and game mechanics and and like custom monsters and rules to make the combat more dynamic or to spice things up. But what I found in that experience is that high-level combat is so complicated in even D&D 5e that I just ditched those house rules because it bogged the game down too much. It made it like there was one module that I ran where every time a player cast a spell, it triggered a wild magic surge. Well, when you have a party of 20th level characters, they're often casting multiple spells per turn on each of their turns. So it took us so long to resolve it because every time somebody cast a spell, we had to resolve a wild magic surge. And when you only have to do that once per turn, it's cool. But when you are doing it over and over and over and over and again, and you just keep rolling on this D100 table, the game gets so slow. On the flip side of that, the game I ran this weekend, I never thought I would see this in D&D before. I've never seen it. I saw a group of players. I trapped an entire group of players inside a prismatic wall. So these 20th level characters, all 6 of them got trapped inside the prismatic wall, and none of them had the ability to teleport. So they had to go through the rules of the spell and bring down the prismatic wall manually. And all of these high level characters are like, all right, who can do fire damage? We have to do fire damage next. Okay, who can do lightning damage? Oh, we have to get a strong wind. How are we going to get a strong wind? Oh, well, it turns out I can summon an air elemental. And this one spell, this one 9th level spell, was all that was needed to make the entire encounter completely memorable. And it was amazing because the players were like, I've never been trapped in a prismatic wall before. I've never had to, and when I have, I've just been able to teleport out of it. It was so cool that they had to like figure this out on the spot. I've never seen that. And it's amazing. Like you read prismatic wall and you're like, who is ever going to go through this entire list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things you have to do to get out of this wall? And they did it. And it was so cool.
I hope you're doing something like murdering NPCs while they're trying to get out.
One of the players wasn't trapped in the wall and was then left to stand toe-to-toe with an ancient red dragon for the couple rounds while the rest of the party had to get out of the wall. And then there was a lich at the same time. So there was red dragon, lich, and a bunch of mages all... And the one fighter was standing up against them all for the.
He's trying to get in. He's like trying to tunnel under the wall. Let me in.
Yeah, and the irony of the whole thing was that this whole high level party spent 3 or 4 rounds trying to bring down a prismatic wall, only for one of the party members to realize that they had a figurine of wondrous power to summon a nightmare, and nightmares can become ethereal and bring people with them. So the player forgot they had actually a trump card to get out of the whole thing. That's D&D.
That's me as a player. I always forget to use abilities and do things, especially because I used to spend so much time DMing. So then you're a player, like totally forget all these cool stuff you can do.
Yep.
Or you should just watch how much I forget Lucky. I took Lucky, and every single game I'll miss a roll, and everybody at the table will go, "Aren't you a lucky guy, though?" And I'm like, "All right, still have those points to spend." I forget my abilities all the time. I never know what I'm doing.
Yeah, we did our video recently on common rules, on common class features that people get wrong. And we said the number one mistake people make with their class features is forgetting they have them.
Totally. I'll vouch for that one for sure. Well, and also you were talking about the prismatic wall, or what was it? Oh, the wild magic table. I was like, now it's like everybody can cast spells. I can imagine how that would bog things down. I mean, even the barbarians casting spells at some point. The last holdout of the magical classes. I wonder when we'll see that. Have you guys had a chance to look at Moot yet?
To look at which?
Mythical Odysseys of Theros.
Oh, okay. That's what people are. Okay, I didn't know that was the acronym for it. That you could call it Moot, but yeah, you can. Yes, I have. I picked it up on D&D Beyond, and I started poking through it. I just looked at the monsters chapter to start off with.
Yeah. We just started tearing into that, so folks, you can expect some videos soon, I imagine. But so the supernatural gifts are kind of cool because like it's a whole new thing that's been added to the game. I haven't gone through the book enough to see if they've added anything else, but I from the very beginning with 5e, one of the things that I saw that it's very modular, so they could just drop in new components or even take things out. I felt like, so I'm just wondering, what other directions we're going to see going forward in the future. As we're seeing, right now, everyone can either pick one of these gifts, so who knows?
The cool thing that I saw tucked at the very tail end of that book, in the monster section, there are mythic monsters, and the rule that the mythic monsters have is very simple. They're all legendary monsters that when they're reduced to 0 hit points, they heal back to full hit points, and their legendary actions change.
Oh.
And I thought that was really cool. It's like phase 2 of the boss fight, and
this isn't even my final form.
Yeah, this isn't even exactly. It's exactly that, and that's the mechanic. And the way it's handled is really elegantly. Is the books just say these monsters have a mythic monster is just fighting two of the same monster twice in a row. Because that's all it does. You kill it once and then you have to kill it again. And I thought that was really cool. It just a simple reminder that, the video game mechanic of this isn't my final form is really good. And tying that to just unlocking a new ability for a monster. I think, that's not new ground, but seeing that in an official 5e D&D book is good.
It is. It's really cool to see the designers learning from other forms of media and pulling it into the game. I mean, video games have done that with RPGs for the longest time, so why not? I mean, I guess fourth edition, they literally tried to do that. They're like, oh, people like video games. Here's all these cool things, and they codified fourth, and people did not care for that very much at all.
No, I think they learned some of the wrong lessons from video games in fourth edition. There was a lot that I loved about fourth edition. I introduced D&D to Kelly with fourth edition D&D, and I think that there's a lot of really brilliant ideas in there. But at the same time, I think it did find a bit of a misplaced inspiration in some ways, and then some of the lessons learned from fourth edition were carried over into fifth, which is great. But I think one of a few of the other really good lessons that fourth edition learned weren't. Like we had a video about our favorite house rules for speeding up combat, and a lot of them were just pilfering our favorite things from fourth edition D&D and bringing them back.
Yeah, some people called us out on that, and we're just like, well, why don't you just play fourth edition? But it's not really about that. There are things that I think fourth edition had to offer that were astounding, and being able to implement those into fifth edition just improves the game for at least Monty and myself.
Yeah, I did spend some time. It was a guilty pleasure of mine to point out all the things from fourth edition that were in 5e now. I feel like the biggest sin that the creators made with 4th was that most of it was just how they called things out, how they named things. Because a lot of the stuff, all they did was change the name of it, and everyone was like, "Oh, that's fine." Like by just not mentioning squares anymore, like a lot of the stuff that was in 4e is back, but now they just say 10 feet, 15 feet, 5 feet, instead of 1 square, 2 square, 3 square. So that part was kind of bizarre. The only thing they didn't bring in it, I was kind of disappointed, was minions. I mean, it's one of the easiest things to do, but that was also one of the best parts of 5e, I thought.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that was actually one of the ones that we pointed out as being a really, really handy rule to resurrect in D&D 5e. I think that there's my kind of like wish for D&D in general is that it would dispense with the rest mechanic and just entirely, but because I actually don't think that I don't know how much it's actually giving any sense of game balance. I would love to see an edition or a house rule of D&D that basically says all characters have all their abilities and all their spell slots all the time, and see what that game would look like if there was no, like, if the resource management element of D&D was kind of downplayed a little bit, because I think that that resource management mechanic is a weird holdover that actually doesn't create the game balance that people think it does in a real weird way. But I would have to write down my full opinion on this to really explain it. But basically,
I already have questions.
No, but basically, I would love to see an edition of Dungeons and Dragons where, when you roll initiative, you have, no matter what happens, when you roll initiative, you get all your spell slots back, and you get all your hit points back, but there are no healing spells. That's like my weird idea, is like there's no healing spells except ones to save your life. But whenever you roll initiative, everyone gets all their hit points.
I'm just imagining the wizard that just casts Wish every round.
Well, that's where the whole thing goes into play. Is like, what do you do with stuff like Wish? What do you do with stuff like Major Image? What do you do with stuff like those things? I don't know. But certainly when it comes to the combat element of D&D, like there's this. The way that I see a lot of D&D get played, right, is very seldom do I see people get through more than 2 or 3 combat encounters in a single adventuring day. And I wonder if just decoupling that, all that needs is just decoupling when the resources refresh from this idea of taking a rest. Like maybe if instead of having a short rest, there was a magic item that was like a potion of short rest. Like, here you go, just drink this potion. And then the DM can actually control from a narrative perspective how often characters get their abilities back, rather than it being tied to time. because I think that's the main thing is like we actually had in our live stream games, we had several live stream game sessions where tons of stuff happened over the course of a single day. And like the players were getting super, super stretched by the end of it. And narratively, it made sense for things to continue. Like from a narrative perspective, these characters would not take a rest. They would not stop, but they were tapped out. But in terms of the story we were creating, it didn't make sense for them to be like, it was like, I don't want you guys to be tapped out yet. I want to continue this story going forward. And I wish I had some way as a DM to say, you get all your abilities back now.
Yeah, I do remember like there was a certain chapter where there was, I think, 4 or 5 major battles, and it took place over, I think, 4 or 5 different episodes of our live play, but they all took place on the same day. So every time we would show up to play, and I'd be like, we didn't get a rest, did we? And Monty would be like, there was no time for a rest.
Yeah.
And it actually got to a point where, you know, we're in the middle of battle and we're trying to strategize, and I'm trying to role play without using game lingo. Like that's something that I like to do on the show, is not be like, I'm out of spell slots. So I'm like, my energies are waning and I don't really have, and like I'm trying to come up with a reason why all I'm doing is casting Firebolt every turn in the middle of like a war. And it's like, come on, you're the sorcerer, you're artillery. What are you doing? And I'm like, I got nothing, guys. I used it all in the last 3 battles and didn't know we weren't going to get a rest. So I see where you're coming from. I think a lot of work would have to be done to smooth that out. For me, resource management is actually one of the most important parts, and one of the parts that I, as a dungeon master, actually enjoy playing around with. I'm looking for ways to stretch my players thin so that they need that. They're like really wanting that rest. And to me, that is an interesting part, but it can get in the way of like, you know, you're in the middle of a narrative story and they're like, do we camp out in the middle of this stronghold for an hour? And it's like, I guess so. I guess that's what you have to do. But
it's weird because like it's one of those things where I think 13th Age did this concept of just the characters have this full heal up mechanic, and that there's a negotiation between the players and the dungeon masters when a full heal up can happen. And I would be really interested in seeing like a variant rule or a house rule for D&D 5e, like, and maybe it is like mythic stamina that says like under certain circumstances the dungeon master can just say the characters gain the benefits of a full rest, or the characters gain the benefits of a short rest, and maybe that's something that is negotiated between the DMs and players. But it would be really interesting. It was also one of those things where like I liked the escalation, because you don't want to have players that can cast Wish 5 times a day, right? Or that can solve every single problem by turning invisible. There is a back and forth to it, but then those are the limits either way that you brush up against.
So the DMG does have optional rules for more grittier games where, you know, a short rest is 8 hours and a week is a long rest. But it goes the other way too, where like a short rest is like 5 minutes and a long rest is like an hour or 2 hours. You know, so I guess that's the middle ground. So you were right. Like in our games, we are good for like a combat, a session. That's about it. You know, if we go crazy, 2, and if the GM is insane, we will do 3. And our players are usually boned because they figured the first one was their encounter for the day, and everyone has Nova'd. You know, so the second encounter is super hard, and then the third is getting harder than that. So yeah, you know, I could definitely see that. That might be an interesting concept where instead of saying like maybe getting rid of spell slots, but like this, like you're saying, when you roll initiative, everything is refreshed. If you wanted to play a harder game too, in the sense that you could throw, you know, more deadly encounters at your players, and they're going to use all the resources in that battle.
Well, that's just it too. It's like player characters in D&D 5e can spike really hard. Like when the players need to throw down and like pump everything that they've got into a battle, player characters, like especially as they get higher level, I like to say that if the player characters go all out with what they can do, they can defeat an encounter up to twice their level. So like a party, and that's where it really scales up. Like you can see a party of 10th level characters take out a challenge rating 20 monster in D&D 5e if they go all out. even though the Dungeon Master's Guide and everything tells you that they're going to get party wiped by that thing, I'm pretty sure they can do it. It depends on the monster, but usually, I mean, I've seen it happen. And just as very commonly, like I've seen 5th level player characters take out challenge rating 10 monsters and even higher. And I think that that there is a weird sort of escalation because as well, like people have a really hard time talking about what difficulty is in Dungeons and Dragons. There's this whole thing of like, if some dungeon masters genuinely believe, and for good reason, that it's not a difficult encounter unless all the player characters lost like half their hit points and one player character went down and was making death saves. Like it was like that was a cakewalk if that didn't happen. Whereas, and so that leads to this mentality where like player characters have to have a healer in their party because the dungeon master wants to build fights where everybody gets beat up. Whereas in our games, we very rarely have healers, and the player characters don't take any damage because they can't afford to take any damage because they don't have any healers. So they win the combat encounter in 2 or 3 rounds without taking any damage. But was that more difficult? Or was that as hard of a combat encounter? They won really, really handedly. But the consequences for them not winning in that way are far more dramatic than a party that has a healer that can get beat up and go into a war of attrition style slog. And I think about this kind of stuff because I play war games, and I often play factions in war games that are like kind of like the Alpha Strike Glass Cannon sort of war game faction. Like I played Warhammer 40K and played Eldar. So that was the faction of like, you know, let's win the game on turn 2, because if you go into turn 3, you're going to run out of gas.
I think when we look at combat encounters and the challenge of making them difficult, I think the CR ratings are like not a great mechanic for weighing out your difficulty. When I was getting started DMing, I would always be like, okay, there are 4 of them. They're level 5. I will put them up against a CR5 creature. And it almost never did anything. It died in like 1 round. And I was like, that wasn't a combat encounter. That was them finding a monster and killing it before it even opened its eyes. So I actually have thrown things way crazier at my party and had them just trample over it. And I think in a lot of our videos, something that Monty and I have discussed a lot is you need to take into account much more than just the monsters you're throwing at the party. You need to take into account the environment. Are there minions? Are there other things at play? Is there an objective to the combat encounter? And those are the sorts of things that I think change a combat encounter from being super easy to, even if it's a cakewalk, there was an additional challenge added to the combat encounter. Even if it's like they need to get an item off of the main bad guy as they flee, and there's a bunch of monsters in between you and that bad guy, suddenly that becomes a new added element of difficulty that I think goes beyond the CR ratings of a monster and allows you to challenge players beyond just looking at a bunch of numbers that don't actually equal out very well.
Yeah.
I tend to use the eyeball method more than anything because there's so many times I've done encounters and we like math it out afterwards and they're like, that is 5 times the deadly encounter should have been. But I'm like, well, you know what? They're weak undead. I'm using like tons and tons of them more as props than anything. And my cleric is just going to dust them and feel really good about themselves. And here's the main monsters that they're going to fight. And it's going to actually be more easy for them, even though the CR rating says, you know, this should be deadly or this should be hard or whatever. So I just eyeball it. You know, players will then surprise you, of course, but like I throw a bunch of Sturges at the party and I'm like, they got a bard. The bard has sleep. Like the bard should just put them all to sleep. This should be fairly easy. And they don't, you know, so they all end up with like 5 Sturges attached to them.
Yeah, and then that's just it. It's like you think, oh, there's an easy way out of this encounter, but never underestimate the foolishness of player characters and just how much they will forget their abilities,
or how creative they can be, right? Because it can go either way. You're like, as a GM, you're totally screwed. There's no guessing.
Yeah, and you totally have to be ready for that. And I think that and I think that as long as those dynamics are embraced, The better you know your players, the better you're going to be able to gauge what they expect. Like, I know with Kelly, Jill, and Joe, I know that they're going to figure it out, but they're going to stumble around and fail in a dramatic and wonderful fashion for 1 or 2 rounds before they get their act together. And that is actually a great dynamic, and that actually creates a really rewarding dynamic, I think, to watch in our show, and a really fun thing to role play.
Are you guys currently exploring any other RPGs?
I have ran Monster of the Week on our channel. I did a 4-part mini series for Monster of the Week, which uses a 2d6 system. It's actually been a blast, and the reason why I loved it so much is something that you'll find in our live stream is a lot of us really enjoy the improv elements of role playing, and Monster of the Week, I think, just strips away a ton of rules, and it's very, very simple in its rule set, and really all the players are just saying, I'm going to do this thing, and then I say roll 2d6 and we determine whether it succeeds or fails miserably. And it's actually we got our friend Mitch to join us for those sessions, and he's an improv comedian. Joe is an improv comedian, and then Jill, she wasn't an improv comedian, but she ended up being amazing at it as well. And it was an absolute blast to play, and a lot of our audience wants me to continue with Monster of the Week, so I'm working on like a treatment for a second story to run. That's really been my expansion from Dungeons and Dragons. I was like only D&D for a long time, and then I love Monster of the Week TV series. Like anything that's Monster of the Week, I usually absolutely love it, so I just bought the book and gave it a shot. And there are other ones that we've been meaning to try out. I know we dabbled in Pathfinder for a brief moment. I know because I have the rule book on my shelf because I bought it when I was first hanging out with Monty, and I remember creating a character in Pathfinder and being thrown off by how much math I had to do. But that was really my only other dabble away from Dungeons and Dragons.
The only one that's like high on my list of things that I want to do a game of is Blaze in the Dark. I aped some of the mechanics from Blaze in the Dark for one of our one shots that we ran recently, and I really liked it. And so I'm interested to try that one out. And there's some cool both mechanics and world building in that stuff. But that's all on the short list. Like I've tried a lot of other RPGs and played quite a few other games. And I mean, right now it's just that like there's so much good D&D to play.
It is true. I mean, and also it's like that's the most widely played game, so it's the easiest one to find players for. Whenever we get a chance, we like to try and like branch out. But for those, I'd rather just be a player and be like, I don't know, give me a pre-gen, and let's figure this out as we go. Because like I don't want to be handed another 400-page rule book. Both the games you guys mentioned, are they both powered by the Apocalypse?
I know Monster of the Week is.
Yeah, and Blades in the Dark is like a cousin. Like I think even like Blades in the Dark is kind of spun off into its own Forged in the Dark rather than powered by the Apocalypse, because it does differ in some of its mechanics. It uses a much different dice resolution mechanic than the 2d6 of powered by the Apocalypse. And actually I really like Blades in the Dark's action resolution mechanic because it allows for quite a lot of granularity, especially in outcomes and results, but it's a little bit more of a negotiation between the dungeon masters and the players, between the game master and the players, which is interesting, but also but not as lightweight, I think, as the kind of the Power by the Apocalypse games, which I like. Like I think game mechanics are really important. I think that game mechanics shape both the world building and how the world works and how the world feels. And so like I'm not a huge fan of like trying to make D&D 5e work for every single possible game and every single possible concept that you could ever have for a role-playing game campaign. Like, I think that there's a certain point where, to use an early example, I don't think D&D 5e should ever really will serve you as well if you want to run a game set in the universe of Warhammer 40,000. I just think that is where the system will totally trip over itself, unless you make extreme changes. And at that point, there's so many great 40k RPGs.
You've
Well,
made it a new game essentially.
Yeah.
I specifically remember early on, I was like, oh, you know, it'd be cool if I made D&D into like a, I don't know, steampunk or cyberpunk adventure. And I started like writing all of these adaptations of rules until Monty was like, you know, there are tons of games out there that you could be playing that already have the rules written for this. And I was just like, yeah, but I'm going to make it my own. And after like 20 hours of work into it, I like scrapped the whole thing. And actually that's how I ended up playing Monster of the Week, was like I was trying to make this like investigative D&D monster hunt, and then I found Monster of the Week and was like, oh wait, I can just run it in here. And in terms of other games, I'll speak for Joe and Jill as well, because both of them have mentioned other games. I know Jill has been painting and reading up on Humblewood. That's something that she's very excited to try out. And I know Joe has a background in playing riffs. He was big into riffs when he was younger. And I know he's been talking about wanting to try mutants and masterminds and things like that as well. So
Yeah.
Thumbs up on the Mutants and Masterminds. Thumbs down on Riffs. maybe the Savage Worlds version will be better.
the only story I know is Joe just always talks about how he came into riffs and was like, what kind of character can I be? And they handed him a book and he's like, I'm going to be a dragon. And
Yeah.
he just was walking around as a dragon for the campaign. And I'm like, you know, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, you can totally do that in Mutants and Masterminds. There's other games where you can do that as well. So my issue with Riffs and Palladium in general is like they're like balance what it's also very much a game that was made in the 80s and has not changed. Like, it has not modernized at all. It's like back then, it's like the more charts and tables you can squeeze into the rule book, the better. Like, you know, and it's whether they make sense or not. And I feel like it still lives there. You know, I think there's a lot of like great story elements and stuff like that, but as far as mechanics, not my favorite. Matter of fact, it was the Palladium system that inspired me to go seek out Mutants and Masterminds, and once I found that, never looked back.
There's an interesting question that came up in the chat about in-game realism between game mechanics, and as you're talking about that, I said, you know, I think that ultimately the dungeon master and the players are the ones responsible for whether or not a game feels realistic. And I think a lot of the games, one of the things that I do harp on a lot is I think that games that have greater mechanical complexity often inject a lot of additional mechanical complexity, particularly rules, because those games are trying to compensate for a lack of trust between the game master and the players. And I don't think that there is any amount of game mechanics that will save you if the players and the dungeon masters do not trust each other. If the players and the DM have a sense of trust and camaraderie and understanding between each other, you will achieve your goals in what you want from a role-playing game, whether that's you want a gritty, realistic experience or you want a high fantasy, completely fantastical comedic romp. But if that trust does not exist, you will not get the outcomes that you want from a role-playing game, no matter how many rules you apply to the game. It just won't happen. And so I think that there is this weird, unfortunately, I think our geek communities have people have trust issues, like, and for a lot of good reasons these days. And so, but I think that the biggest thing with any role-playing game is that if you don't trust the people that you're playing a role-playing game with, you might want to reconsider playing that game with them entirely. And it's a different kind of trust than like It's not the same kind of thing of like, I don't trust the dungeon master. Like, never trust a smiling DM. The dungeon master will always have a trick up their sleeve or whatever. It's not that kind of thing of like the dungeon master says, oh, there's a trap down this hallway. It is about like a deeper level of trust, as like an interpersonal trust between friends, to know how to manage each other's interests and feelings and things like that. And if you have an environment of trust, you will be able to create a realistic feeling game. But if you don't have that trust, you will never feel like the game is realistic. Because if you don't trust the dungeon master or the game master to be the arbiter of the rules of the game, then you'll always argue with them. And like, that's where rules lawyers come from. Like, rules lawyers don't trust the dungeon master. That's just it. They just are like, for whatever reason, they don't trust the dungeon master to be the one in charge of the rules. And so they want the rules to control the dungeon master, for whatever reason. And I just say, I think that's a complete interpersonal failure right from the get-go.
Yeah, it's really hard to move forward from that position. And we've talked about this a lot. And I know you guys, you've got a huge channel. You get tons and tons of comments and questions, and many of the questions always lead me down the same path. And it's really just that, right? It's like, who are you playing this game with? That, like, this is a question you would ask. Like, hopefully, and I think this is the problem with this is mainly going to happen when you're playing with people maybe in your local game store, and that's the only place you play, or online. You're not developing relationships with the people you're playing the game with. They're not your friends. They're just people that you come and associate with to facilitate this thing you like to do. And I feel like that is the worst way to game.
Yeah. And I also want to say, just because a few people mentioned it in the chat, my definition of a rules lawyer is a shark style lawyer. A rules lawyer is trying to exploit the game, period, full out. If you are not trying to exploit the game, you're probably not a rules lawyer, at least as I define it. That's just my kind of... I always like to clarify that. Yeah.
Like I have a player at my table who has played Dungeons and Dragons longer than I have. And there are occasions where like somebody will ask, oh, does this work like this? And sometimes I'm not 100% sure. And I'll even look up to that player and he'll go, I think it works like this. And I'm like, yeah, I think so too. And it's just one of those things that like we have a trust level.
Yeah.
And I don't see him as a rules lawyer. I see him as somebody who knows the rule book almost better than I do. And so if I'm unsure of something, he's my second in command for rules. And that's not the same thing as like, there's the whole thing in the Dungeon Masters books and everything that basically says like, we're the DM is the one making the final decision. And a rules lawyer is somebody who's like, well, the rules work like this, so I should be allowed to do this, even though the DM is saying otherwise at the game that we're playing. That's where you're starting an argument with the DM about something that they've already made a ruling on, which is the important part. And I think that's the distinct difference. Is somebody who knows the rules really well and talks about them at the game is not doing wrong. Somebody who knows the rules really well and is trying to use them to exploit the game and undermine the DM's decisions, that's not good.
Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely. There's some chats popping up. Rules legal assistant is better. Not a fan of uninvited backseat GMing. And also, I'm not saying that gaming at your local store or online is bad. I'm just saying I'm recommending, in my opinion, is you should seek deeper connections with the people that you share this game with, and it'll ultimately make the game much better for you.
I 100% agree. I totally do. And I think it's a thing that is actually really difficult now in this online age, in this age of social distancing and all the things that we're doing right now, where, a lot of play happens online and it's really easy to like sit down, shut up and turn off and cause, not have that same kind of interpersonal connection.